Hi, I'm Tessa with Brainrot News, bringing you a heaping helping of broken American democracy for you to choke on. Today, we're stuffing executive overreach down your throat because checks and balances are just one guy with a Sharpie and a God complex signing the country into oblivion. In this episode, we're plunging headfirst into the executive order industrial complex and how the current administration seems to favor the swift unilateral stroke of a Sharpie over the slower collaborative craft of traditional governance. We'll be dissecting the systematic unthreading of the administrative safety net, education directives imposed like a perverse manifesto designed to dismantle critical thinking and enforce a narrow revisionist narrative, and how social programs are being discarded, treating the well-being and survival of citizens as irrelevant distractions from their core agenda of power and profit. We'll get into the constitutional overreach, the political motivations so naked they should probably be arrested for public indecency, and the long-term consequences that could leave the separation of powers looking more like a hostile divorce with joint custody of a smoking crater. We'll cover the legal blowback, the dissenters screaming into the void, and why this whole governing by executive order thing might just be the fastest route to authoritarianism. Prepare yourself to see how executive power is being abused, not just to enact a far-right agenda, but to carve it directly into the machinery of government. This is not statesmanship, it is a hostile takeover. The systematic evisceration of democratic norms carried out under the sterile glare of administrative lights. Stay tuned as we dissect the impact of these ink-stained executive orders and the deepening wounds inflicted upon the separation of powers and the Constitution itself.
Brainrot the news.
Part 1. When the Legislature became optional. Executive orders are the presidential cheat code for bypassing the clunky, inconvenient mechanics of democracy. They are the directives a president can issue to make things happen without the pesky business of consensus or Congress. Constitutionally, they're rooted in Article 2, the part that says the president has executive power and must take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Which sounds nice until you realize it's basically the vague fine print that every autocrat dreams of. The Constitution never explicitly says the president can just write laws on a whim, but over time, everyone kind of agreed, yeah, sure, why not? So here we are, governed not by detailed legislative debate, but by signed scraps of paper with the legal weight of a wrecking ball. Executive orders operate in a beautiful legal gray area, just murky enough for presidents to expand their authority while still pretending it's all above board. The framers of the Constitution wanted 3 branches to keep each other in check, but executive orders are like a crowbar wedged in that balance, prying it open just wide enough for one person to shove their entire agenda through without asking nicely. And no one is shoving harder than Donald J. Trump. Since returning to power on January 20th, 2025, Trump has embraced executive orders like a personal policy bypass. By May 8th, he'd unleashed 147 of them in addition to 37 memoranda and 50 proclamations. In one day alone, he fired off 26 orders. That's more than one executive action per day. At this rate, the man's going to run out of interns to hand him markers. This is not just a guy getting things done. It is a guy sprinting past Congress with a flamethrower and a to-do list. It is speed running the American experiment like a broken beta build. Executive orders are not just tools in this administration, they're the whole damn toolbox duct taped to a sledgehammer. Some of these orders are the usual fare, like renaming things or reshuffling departments, but others dig deep into the machinery of government. Trump's strategy here is painfully clear. If you can't get legislation passed through a dysfunctional Congress, just go around it. Burn the maze instead of solving it. Who needs consensus when you have a Sharpie and a platform? This constant reliance on executive orders, this governing by presidential fiat, is undemocratic and dangerous. It pushes us closer to authoritarianism with each signature. Because what are checks and balances when one man holds the pen and everyone else is just scrambling to catch up? Congress was designed to represent the diverse will of the people. It is messy, slow, and often incompetent, but that's the point. Deliberation takes time and debate builds consensus. But executive orders bypass all that in favor of instant gratification, like a microwave version of governance with all the nutritional value to match. What happens when the policies pushed through these orders do not reflect the broader will of the people? What happens when they're radical, cruel, and catastrophically misguided? There is no room for real public debate, no legislative oversight, and no time for society to catch its breath. Just another degree from the top, another shift in policy, and another layer of damage baked into the system. This is what happens when one branch swells at the expense of the others. When the executive grows too strong, the republic weakens. The people's voices, already drowned out by lobbyists and billionaires, get muffled even further. The president does not need your opinion to sign an executive order. He just needs his marker to work. So when Trump issues order after order, reshaping the government and society from the top down, we are watching power consolidate. We are watching democracy contract. We are watching the boundaries of executive authority stretch to their limit and then a little further. And if we do not push back, if we do not demand a real participatory democracy, we might wake up one day and find that the Constitution didn't break. It just quietly became irrelevant. Part 2. One deranged man and his Sharpie. Let's talk about what happens when one man governs by Sharpie, a tsunami of executive orders designed less to manage the country than to reshape it in the image of a late-night Fox News segment. Trump's second-term executive order blitz is about bulldozing the margins entirely, rewriting the rules of the game in permanent marker while everyone else still doesn't know how to play. First, we have the administrative state. Enter the Department of Government Efficiency. Fucking Doge. A meme. We have a meme department. Yay. Headed by none other than Elon Musk, because when you want to make the government work better, you obviously bring in a guy whose cars catch fire almost as often as his Twitter decisions. This bureaucratic Frankenstein is supposed to streamline government, but what it's really doing is gutting it. Trump's orders slash federal jobs, restructure hiring, and of course, eliminate every last DEI initiative like they were cockroaches in a Mar-a-Lago kitchen. Apparently, equity and inclusion are now considered inefficiencies. Killing DEI does not save taxpayer dollars. It torpedoes any chance of building a government that actually looks like the people it's supposed to serve. But if you believe justice is a liability and representation is woke propaganda, congratulations, you're already on board. In education, it gets worse. Orders to reform higher education accreditation, promote HBCUs, and boost AI learning sound like buzzwords until you realize they're just the Trojan horses. The real meat is in the executive orders reinstating common sense discipline and ending DEI in schools. Common sense here is a dog whistle the size of a foghorn. They are a free pass to reintroduce harsh discriminatory policies that disproportionately target Black and brown students while pretending race has nothing to do with it. It's colorblindness as a cover for cruelty. Meanwhile, dismantling DEI in education guarantees the preservation of barriers that have kept marginalized students out of opportunity and shoved into pipelines to incarceration. We are not building schools here. We are rebuilding hierarchies. Now onto the social front, where the executive orders stop pretending to be neutral. One bans gender ideology extremism, while another restores biological truth, and yet another aims to protect children from what the administration calls chemical and surgical mutilation. And yeah, those are real titles lifted straight from the right-wing swamp where nuance goes to die. They are state-sponsored bigotry draped in the language of concern. Under the guise of protecting children, Trump is denying trans and non-binary people access to healthcare, dignity, and legal recognition. It is not about science or safety. It is about erasure. Just to round things out, the administration dropped a religious liberty commission into the mix because when you're building a theocratic surveillance state, you gotta start somewhere. They're attempting to enforce one narrow version of morality at the expense of everyone else's. In law enforcement and immigration, the orders come fast and brutal. More money for cops, more ICE raids, and more targeting of so-called criminal aliens, more pressure on sanctuary cities. Public safety is the sales pitch, but the fine print reads more like racial profiling, more family separations, and more terror for immigrant communities. It is collective punishment, and it turns local police into the long arm of an increasingly radical federal agenda. On the economic front, the orders push tariffs, buy American policies, and a nationalistic fossil fuel binge. You'll hear words like critical medicines and energy independence, but what it boils down to is jingoistic economics dressed up in supply chain cosplay. Tariffs jack up prices. Drilling for offshore minerals just accelerates climate collapse. And cost-effective federal contracts amount to corporate welfare with a MAGA sticker slapped on top. Now it's time for the war on culture, Trump's holy crusade against NPR and PBS. One executive order axes federal funding for these institutions on the grounds of bias, which to Trump just means not loyal enough. Make no mistake, defunding public broadcasting does not just kill Elmo, it also kills access to independent news, educational content, and the last shred of non-commercial media available to rural and low-income communities. This is censorship by starvation, a state-sponsored media purge with polite-sounding paperwork. And last, but not least, Trump is withdrawing the United States from the World Health Organization. Again, making America healthy again is when you sabotage global health coordination in the middle of a world still dealing with pandemic fallout. Super smart. Actually, this is an act of national self-harm. Trump is not just abandoning international cooperation, he's selling it for scrap. Taken together, these executive orders are not isolated actions. They are the blueprint for an ideological regime, a conservative revolution executed not with votes or laws, but with paperwork and presidential authority. It is not about governing. It is about imprinting an agenda on the country by decree, bypassing democracy in favor of streamlined domination. The most horrifying part is that that it's working quietly, legally, and for now, without enough people paying attention. Part 3. Taking a rusty knife to the Constitution. Trump's latest flurry of presidential directives hasn't just tripped a few legal wires, it triggered an all-out courtroom cage match over the soul of American governance. Welcome to the Sharpie versus the Constitution, where every executive order doubles as a lawsuit magnet and every MAGA policy is a test case in how hard you can tug the threads of democracy before the whole suit unravels. Let's set the stage with a throwback. Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. versus Sawyer, 1952. A steel mill case that set the blueprint that says you do not get to play king unless Congress hands you the scepter first. The takeaway is that executive power is strongest when Congress nods along and weakest when you're just winging it because Tucker Carlson said something spicy last night. That's bad news for Trump, who's been wielding executive orders like a toddler with a crayon on your mortgage documents. The courts are not amused. Let's start with DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk's wet nightmare of privatized bureaucracy. It was created by executive fiat, staffed like a failed Kickstarter, and operating with all the legal footing of a Wile E. Coyote rocket skate. Judges are already halting DOGE-driven actions, especially when they try to move federal employees around like Monopoly pieces without Congress's blessing. Turns out, if you want to restructure the government, you're supposed to ask permission, not just scribble "fire everyone" on a napkin and call it policy. Then we've got the executive orders redefining sex and gender with the nuance of a 4chan shitpost that say biology is destiny and everything else is ideology. While the fight is far from over, these orders are already facing significant legal battles under the due process and equal protection clauses, leading courts to halt specific parts of their implementation as the challenges proceed. Because yeah, defining human rights with a medieval biology textbook doesn't really hold up under constitutional scrutiny. They are also getting hit for vagueness, like legally vague, which is really rare. When your laws are so incoherent they violate the Fifth Amendment, maybe rethink them. Or don't. Trump sure didn't. Don't get us started on the DEI purges. Orders that read like they were written by the ghost of George Wallace, dismantling inclusion under the guise of false equality. Legal challenges here focus on equal protection violations, because when your policies disproportionately target marginalized groups, that is not just morally bankrupt, it's also constitutionally radioactive. Some judges are already issuing injunctions, slapping temporary handcuffs on these orders until the courts can sort out whether they're malicious, incompetent, or both. Spoiler, it's both. Even school discipline is a battlefield. Trump's orders attempt to banish dispart impact analysis, the one legal tool schools use to fight systemic racism. But that analysis is backed by civil rights laws and decades of precedent. The courts know it and civil rights lawyers know it, but apparently Trump's team does not. Then there's the First Amendment, which Trump seems to treat like a suggestion. Take the executive order defunding NPR and PBS. Why? Bias, of course. That is, failing to suck his dick the way OAN does. Federal money for public broadcasting is appropriated by Congress, and pulling it based on bad vibes from a few documentaries is unconstitutional retaliation for protected speech. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is already suing, claiming the president can't just yank board members and loot the coffers like he's raiding Fort Knox. You cannot declare war on free speech with taxpayer dollars, at least not legally. Now enters the Religious Liberty Commission. If this thing starts picking winners and losers in the Holy Books department, the Establishment Clause will be waiting with open arms and a gavel. The government is not supposed to play favorites when it comes to God, at least not unless Amy Coney Barrett says it's fine. So what ties all of these challenges together? The separation of powers, the old, dusty pillar of American democracy Trump keeps tripping over. Article 1 gives Congress, not the president, the keys to legislate, appropriate funds, and decide what's actually legal. Trump's response has been to kick down the door and redecorate with lawsuits. Fortunately, the courts still exist for now. Judicial review is the last line of defense between this constitutional bonfire and total collapse. District courts are swamped with challenges. Circuit courts are already weighing in, and we are all praying that the Supreme Court still remembers what the Constitution is for, because the outcome of these battles will define whether executive power has boundaries, or if the president is now just an emperor in a red tie. So buckle up. The legal war is here, and it's being fought over whether the law still matters when the president decides to write it himself. Part 4. Executive orders and the art of screaming into the void. At this point, executive orders are not just legal tools. They are the preferred method of governance for presidents who hate talking to people, reading laws, or negotiating with Congress like a grown-up. And for Trump, they become the presidential equivalent of tweeting while drunk, fast, direct, and utterly unconcerned with consequences. The Trump administration's executive order addiction is less about governance and more about vengeance, branding, and base-pleasing theater. When Congress becomes an inconvenient speed bump on the road to authoritarianism, executive orders become the off-road preferred vehicle of choice. Trump's strategy is very simple. If you cannot legislate it, decree it. If you cannot pass a law, shout one into existence. And if the courts slap it down, fine. You have still sent the message, and that's what matters. They are targeting DEI programs as a way of tossing red meat to the anti-woke wolves who think inclusion is a Marxist plot. The war on gender ideology is a campaign rally in legalese, designed to score points with evangelicals and anti-trans crusaders while turning marginalized people into political punching bags. The defunding of NPR and PBS is just revenge porn for people who think Sesame Street turned their kid gay. This is political maneuvering at its most brazen. Every executive order is a billboard for Trumpism, a press release stapled to the Constitution. It is about shaping headlines, framing debates, and flexing on your enemies. Congress is not a co-equal branch here. It is an obstacle to be ignored or shamed into submission. It's their new governing strategy. Trump's base does not want slow deliberation or compromise. They want instant gratification. They want to see their fears and hatreds turned into policy yesterday. Executive orders let the president cosplay as a dictator on demand, issuing mandates that sound tough even if they die in court 2 weeks later. It is political Red Bull, a sugar rush of authoritarianism, but with none of the calories of actual legislation. There's another catch though. The same Sharpie that writes an executive order can just as easily be used by the next president to cross it out. So while Trump fans cheer every directive like it's the 10 Commandments, the truth is they're written on an Etch-a-Sketch. Shake it in 2028 and they are gone. This kind of volatility doesn't just make for bad policy, it makes for national whiplash. Businesses can't plan, schools do not know which set of rules they're following, and civil servants are stuck between enforce this today and prepare to burn it tomorrow. It is chaos governance, and the only people who win are the lawyers charging by the hour. All of this just deepens the trench warfare of American politics. When executive orders are the main vehicle for ideology, the legislative process becomes obsolete and compromise becomes treason. Why negotiate when you can decree? Why build coalitions when you can build enemies? What we're seeing is not just the erosion of norms, it is also the substitution of governance with spectacle. Trump's executive orders are not written for the history books. They are written for the Fox News Chiron. They're designed to trend, to trigger, to troll, and in doing so, they turn policy into propaganda and leadership into branding. So the next time you see a sweeping executive order from this administration, don't ask, what problem does this solve? Ask, what audience is this playing to? Because odds are the goal isn't to fix anything. It's to look like you're fixing something angrily, theatrically, and without any pesky input from democracy. Part 5. The legislative branch is dead. Congress is starting to look less like a co-equal branch of government and more like an audience to a reality show presidency. And in Trump's second season of Who Wants to Be a Dictator, the legislative branch is lucky if it gets a speaking role. You know what's fun? Shredding centuries of constitutional order with the flourish of a signature. That's what executive orders are now. Not just tools of governance, but weapons of war in the ongoing assault on representative democracy. Remember the Constitution? That dusty little relic that says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress? Cute, right? Trump's approach to the law is very simple. If Congress will not do it, the king shall decree it. No messy hearings, no filibusters, and no negotiations, just Sharpies and sycophants. It is about erasing Congress from the process entirely. Why wait for the House to stop yelling at TikTok and the Senate to crawl out of Mitch McConnell's mausoleum when you can just bypass them altogether? Legislative gridlock is not a bug in the system anymore. It is the justification for gutting it. Even worse, this strategy leaves Congress scrambling to play catch-up, like a drunk referee in a rigged game. How do you conduct oversight on a government that operates via vengeance? You cannot subpoena a tweet. You cannot hold hearings on a whisper campaign. And you cannot defund something that wasn't funded by Congress to begin with. By flooding the system with executive orders, Trump effectively breaks the accountability mechanisms built into American governance. There is no paper trail, no debate, no deliberation, just imperial decrees dropped from the mind of a sadistic, hateful person. Congress can't even exercise the power of the purse if the administration just invents new departments by fiat and dares anyone to stop them. The establishment of the Department of Government Efficiency was done without a single vote in Congress. Yet now it directs staffing and spending decisions with all the grace of a Banana Republic ministry. What's next? The Department of Loyalty Oaths? The Bureau of Patriotic Minority Hunters? It is a cancer on the body politic. The president now claims the right to not only implement laws, but to create them, rewrite them, and selectively enforce them based on whether the subject was mean to him on Truth Social. And here's the nightmare scenario. What if this sticks? What if this administration sets a precedent so corrosive, so normalized, that future presidents of any party treat Congress as a ceremonial relic? What happens when governance is nothing more than a string of executive orders reversed, reissued every 4 years like some deranged governmental etch-a-sketch? What you get is a country governed by whiplash and spite, where long-term planning is impossible and public trust dissolves. The founders designed a system of checks and balances. What we have got now is a system of vengeance and vendettas. The real tragedy is that Congress is letting it happen. Instead of asserting its authority, it is too busy fundraising, fear-mongering, and filming TikToks and stairwells to remember that it has power, that it could do something, but it won't, because stopping an imperial presidency would require courage, vision, and a functioning spine, none of which you'll find in today's Capitol Rotunda. So as Trump continues to govern with the flair of a late-stage Roman emperor, issuing proclamations from his golden throne while Congress fiddles and burns, remember, this is not just a moment, it is a mutation, and if it goes unchecked, we may never get the old balance of power back, because once the king gets the crown, history shows he rarely gives it up. Part 6. Sounding the alarm. While Trump churns out executive orders like he's speed-running the Federal Register, a chorus of critics is frantically pulling the fire alarm in a building that's already engulfed in flames. Think tanks, advocacy groups, and public media are all waving red flags. But in today's America, red flags are just the new wallpaper. The alarms are coming from constitutional scholars, civil rights lawyers, and that guy on MSNBC who hasn't blinked since 2015. And they are all saying the same thing. We are watching the calcification of executive overreach into permanent infrastructure. Welcome to the Imperial Presidency, Population 1, and he's tweeting at judges again. Groups like the Brennan Center and Center for American Progress have been frantically publishing white papers warning that Trump's executive orders are bypassing every safeguard we used to pretend we had. These are not just tweaks to regulatory minutia, they're full-blown ideological shockwaves. From gutting DEI programs to bulldozing environmental protections, Trump is not just wielding executive power like a tool, he's swinging it like a sledgehammer at the walls of liberal democracy. This process is about as transparent as a CIA memo written in disappearing ink. Executive orders are crafted behind closed doors, hatched by think tank interns hopped up on cocaine and a dream, and rubber stamped in between golf rounds. There is no public debate, no comment period, and no hearings, just raw, uncut ideology piped straight from the Heritage Foundation to the Resolute desk. It's policy making without the policy or the making. It's governance as performance art, and if you're not in the base, you're not in the room. Polls from Elon University, no, not that Elon, show a majority of Democrats are freaking out about the president's growing power. A good chunk of independents are too. And as for Republicans, well, if it owns the libs, it's constitutional enough, I guess. The reach of this executive power grab extends to the information we consume. Public media outlets like PBS and NPR have found themselves squarely on the presidential hit list, targeted by executive actions aimed at cutting their funding. It's the behavior of an administration that views independent journalism not as a public service, but as a hostile foreign entity that needs to be neutralized. When these organizations and other rightly condemn this as authoritarian, undemocratic, and a clear assault on the First Amendment, the counterattack from loyalists was swift and dripping with irony, dismissing NPR as government propaganda, often in the same breath as retweeting actual state-controlled media, while demanding everyone migrate to partisan echo chambers like the Daily Wire. This is not a debate about budgets. It is a front in the war on a free and informed public. All this is a coordinated campaign to dismantle pluralism, erode civil liberties, and roll back decades of hard-won progress for marginalized groups. When you rule by executive fiat, you do not have to answer to anyone. You don't have to negotiate with Black communities about police brutality, or with queer folks about healthcare access, or with the climate about its rapidly approaching murder-suicide pact with capitalism. You just sign, smile, and strut off stage while the consequences pile up like bodies in Game of Thrones. This is not governance, it is domination, and rational voices are screaming at the top of their lungs that we're teetering on the edge of a cliff. But in this administration, outrage is just fuel. Every protest, every editorial, every deeply concerned letter from a Harvard law professor only confirms to the right that they are winning. So the question becomes, what happens when the opposition sees the danger clearly, but the system no longer cares what they think? Part 7. Burn the crown, not the Constitution. So here we are, a country built on rebellion against kings now bows to a man who rules with a Sharpie and a stack of blank executive orders like he's cosplaying Caesar between golf rounds. The Trump administration's second-term strategy is crystal clear. Don't govern with Congress, govern around it, sidestep debate, bulldoze dissent, and pass policy by decree like some unholy mashup of Andrew Jackson and a disgruntled HOA president. This is not just a political inconvenience. It is not just bad optics or poor form. It is a full-scale hostile takeover of the democratic process. Executive orders are no longer the exception. They are the blueprint. The legislative branch, once the rowdy bar fight of American politics, has been reduced to a quiet suggestion box duct taped to a Mar-a-Lago urinal. The orders themselves are not small stuff. We are talking about ideological napalm dropped on everything from civil rights to climate policy to the actual existence of facts. They are a demolition permit, and when they're written by white nationalist interns with an axe to grind and a copy of Project 2025 in their back pocket, you are witnessing an authoritarian dry run with a budget. This is executive overreach with a chainsaw, and it's carving through the Constitution like butter. So what the hell do we do? First, Congress has to wake the fuck up. Stop handing over power in exchange for vacation time and donor check. Legislate, fight, subpoena, and reclaim your spine from whatever dark closet you shoved it into back in 2001. Second, the courts must do their jobs. When executive orders violate the Constitution, and many of them do, they need to be challenged loudly and relentlessly. Sue the bastards and tie up the system if you have to. That's what it is there for. Third, and most important, you. Yes, you. The sleep-deprived citizen watching this at 2 a.m. while doom scrolling and wondering how many more rights you'll lose before breakfast. You have to give a damn. Public pressure still works, even in a rigged game. Protest, vote, organize, and harass your congressperson like your life depends on it, because it does. This is not just about Trump. It is about precedent. If this becomes normal, then future presidents, left, right, or whatever hellish alignment Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin think of next, will treat Congress like an HR department they can ignore. Our system of government is held together with duct tape, centuries of mythologized bullshit, and a fragile belief in rules that only matter if we all pretend they still do. If we want to keep this whole republic thing from turning into a Netflix docuseries on how America died screaming, we need to fight for it. If executive power becomes absolute, then democracy becomes performance art, and we all become extras in someone else's empire. That's all for Brainrot News. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe before Trump signs an executive order making independent journalism punishable by death.